My 10-year-old son was shoved to the ground at Costco for taking a free sample. The woman who did it? Our new HOA president. 3 days later, I found a $200 fine taped to my door. The charge? Aggressive sample consumption reflecting poorly on the community. This is HOA Unfiltered, and what happened next exposed a conspiracy of corruption that ended with a president in prison. I'm David Garrison, a 42-year-old project manager who moved to Pine Ridge Estates with my 10-year-old son, Ethan, about 6 months ago. We thought we were upgrading to a nice, quiet suburban neighborhood with good schools and friendly neighbors. What we got instead was a front-row seat to the most unhinged HOA president I've ever encountered. Ethan and I had turned our weekly Costco run into a father-son tradition since my divorce. He loves the free samples, I love the bulk discounts, and we both love getting out of the house together. It all started on a perfectly normal Saturday afternoon. We were in the frozen food section when it happened. Ethan had just grabbed a sample of those little spinach and cheese puffs when this woman, who I'd later learn was named Patricia Hawthorne, literally shoved past him with her cart. My son stumbled backward, his sample cup flying through the air and landing on the concrete floor. The woman didn't even pause. She just kept marching toward the dairy section like she'd done nothing wrong. I helped Ethan steady himself and asked if he was okay. His little face crumpled. He wasn't hurt, but he was shocked and embarrassed. He looked up at me and whispered, "Dad, did I do something bad?" That's when my dad mode switched from confused to protective. Patricia apparently went straight to the bathroom because suddenly we heard this voice echoing from the women's restroom nearby. She was shouting with such intensity that other shoppers were stopping to stare. This is exactly why property values are declining, her voice boomed from behind the bathroom door. Children running wild in public spaces, grabbing samples like feral animals. This is what happens when we don't enforce community standards. I stood there absolutely baffled, holding my son's hand while this woman continued her bathroom manifesto about sample etiquette and neighborhood dignity. A Costco employee approached us looking equally confused and asked if everything was all right. I just shrugged and said we were fine, though I was starting to wonder what kind of neighborhood we'd moved into. The bathroom sermon continued for another minute before Patricia emerged, her face flushed with righteous indignation. She looked directly at me and said with a tone dripping with condescension, "You need to control your child's behavior. This reflects poorly on all of Pine Ridge Estates." Then she walked away, leaving me standing there with my jaw practically on the floor. Ethan tugged on my sleeve and asked innocently, "Dad, what did I do wrong?" I told him he'd done nothing wrong, that some adults just have bad days. I thought that was the end of it. Just a bizarre encounter with a stranger we'd never see again. I was wrong. So wrong. 3 days later, I found the first violation notice taped to my front door. It was an official HOA citation for failure to maintain appropriate public decorum while representing the Pine Ridge Estates community. I had to read it 3 times to believe it was real. The notice claimed that my son's aggressive sample consumption at Costco had been witnessed by the HOA president and constituted a violation of the Community Standards Clause in our HOA agreement. The fine was $200. Surely no HOA could actually fine someone for how their child ate free samples at a store 5 miles away from the neighborhood. But when I called the HOA office, they confirmed it was legitimate. Patricia Hawthorne, our illustrious HOA president, had filed the complaint herself. According to the secretary, Patricia believed that residents' behavior anywhere in public reflected on the neighborhood's reputation. The citations kept coming after that. One for excessive display of casual wear in public spaces because Ethan wore his favorite dinosaur hoodie to the grocery store. Another for improper vehicle loading technique because I put my Costco haul in the trunk instead of the back seat, which Patricia claimed showed poor planning skills unbefitting of a Pine Ridge resident. Each came with escalating fines, $300, $500, $750. I tried to be reasonable at first. I wrote polite emails explaining that these weren't actual HOA violations. I attached screenshots of our HOA bylaws, highlighting that none of these supposed infractions were mentioned anywhere in the document. Patricia's responses were always the same: long, rambling messages about community excellence and how my resistance to improvement was exactly what was wrong with modern neighborhoods. She started CCing other board members, trying to build a case against me. Then came the meeting announcement. Patricia had called an emergency HOA session to discuss the recent decline in resident standards and the need for expanded enforcement powers. The agenda specifically mentioned the garrison situation as a key talking point. I knew I had to attend, if only to defend myself against whatever she was planning. I also started doing some research of my own. I knew I couldn't just take this lying down. So I started digging, and what I found, it went so much deeper than a few crazy finds. Patricia had been HOA president for only 8 months, but in that time she'd issued more fines than the previous 5 presidents combined. She created dozens of new violations that weren't in any official HOA documentation. Families had been fined for everything from having mismatched pumpkins at Halloween to using the wrong brand of mulch in their gardens. But here's where it got interesting. Through a public records request, I obtained copies of HOA financial statements. There were charges for community assessment trips to high-end restaurants, neighborhood planning retreats at luxury spas, and, most tellingly, monthly $500 Costco purchases labeled as supplies for HOA operations. I cross-referenced these with HOA meeting minutes and found that no supplies from these purchases ever appeared at HOA events. Patricia wasn't just power-hungry. She was funding her entire lifestyle with our HOA dues. I also reached out to other neighbors who'd been fined. The Johnsons had been cited for their daughter's inappropriate chalk art on their own driveway. The Gwynns received a $1,000 fine for hosting a birthday party that went until 9:15 p.m., 15 minutes past the acceptable celebration hours Patricia had invented. Everyone had similar stories, but most had just paid the fines to avoid confrontation. Armed with this information, I contacted a lawyer friend who specialized in HOA disputes. She confirmed what I suspected. Patricia's actions weren't just unethical, they were illegal. HOA boards can't create new rules without proper votes, can't fine residents for behavior outside the neighborhood that doesn't violate actual bylaws, and certainly can't use HOA funds for personal expenses. We had a solid case for both criminal charges and civil action. The emergency HOA meeting was held on a Thursday evening in the community center. I arrived to find the room packed with residents, many of whom I recognized as Patricia's other victims. The room was tense. You could feel the anger simmering. And there was Patricia at the podium in the sharp, severe pantsuit, clicking through a PowerPoint like a CEO presenting quarterly losses. But her slides weren't graphs. They were photos of us, of our neighbors, shopping, and living our lives. She began her presentation about the need for enhanced enforcement capabilities. She actually had a slide with a photo of Ethan at Costco, reaching for a sample with a huge smile on his face, labeled Exhibit A, Uncontrolled Minor Creating Public Disturbance. I'd had enough. I stood up and asked for permission to address the board. Patricia tried to shut me down, but other board members, sensing the mood in the room, overruled her. I walked to the front with my folder of evidence. I started by projecting the actual HOA bylaws on the screen, highlighting that none of Patricia's citations were valid. Then I showed the financial records, the personal purchases disguised as HOA expenses, the thousands of dollars she'd essentially stolen from our community. The room went silent as I presented receipt after receipt, bank statement after bank statement. Patricia's face went from red to white to an interesting shade of purple. She tried to interrupt, sputtering about context and interpretation, but I kept going. I showed emails where she'd threatened residents, documentation of her harassment, and yes, security footage from Costco that a sympathetic employee had helped me obtain. Showing her shoving my 10-year-old son and then retreating to the bathroom to shout about community standards. The crowd gasped when they saw her push Ethan. Several parents stood up, voicing their outrage. The other board members looked horrified. The treasurer, an elderly man named Robert, immediately called for Patricia's resignation. The secretary seconded the motion. Patricia tried to defend herself, claiming she was being persecuted for trying to maintain standards, but the evidence was overwhelming. When someone pointed out that she literally assaulted a child on camera, she actually said with indignation, he was taking too many samples. It was a defensive action for the reputation of Pine Ridge Estates. The room erupted. Parents were shouting. Board members were calling for order. And Patricia was screaming about conspiracy theories and jealous neighbors. The police had to be called to restore order. 2 officers arrived, and after reviewing the evidence of embezzlement I'd uncovered, they informed Patricia she was under investigation. They also watched the Costco footage and told her that shoving a child could constitute assault. The board voted unanimously to remove Patricia as president effective immediately. They also voted to invalidate all fines she'd issued during her tenure and to pursue criminal charges for the embezzled funds. The district attorney later charged her with embezzlement of approximately $32,000 in HOA funds. She was also charged with simple assault for the Costco incident. Patricia's trial was swift. The evidence was clear and multiple witnesses testified about her behavior. She was found guilty of embezzlement and assault. The judge, clearly frustrated with her complete lack of remorse and her continued insistence that she was protecting property values, sentenced her to 18 months in prison for the embezzlement and 6 months for the assault, to be served concurrently. Plus ordered her to pay full restitution of the stolen funds and an additional $50,000 in punitive damages to the HOA. When the sentence was read, Patricia stood up and shouted at the judge that he was contributing to the decline of suburban America. She actually told him his courtroom needed better landscaping. The bailiffs had to physically escort her out as she yelled about the wrong type of fluorescent lighting in the courthouse and how the jury's business casual attire was a disgrace to the legal system. Her lawyer just shook his head and packed up his briefcase, probably wondering how he'd gotten stuck with such a client. So, what's the moral of the story? Never, ever assume an HOA board has unchecked power. And always, always read the bylaws. Have you ever had a crazy HOA story? Share it in the comments below. This is Kelvin Garrison for HOA Unfiltered. Thanks for listening.